My name is Ashley Cole. I'm 33 years old, and I have kept total strangers alive with my two bare hands. But at my sister's wedding, my own mother introduced me like she was apologizing for me. "This is my other daughter," she said, sweeping a hand toward the corner where I stood holding a clipboard. "Just a nurse." And then she laughed. 120 people laughed with her, the way a room laughs when the woman in the good dress gives them permission. My sister laughed hardest of all. I stood there in a room full of crystal and candlelight, and I felt myself disappear the way I always did around my family. But here is what my mother didn't know. One man in that ballroom already knew exactly who I was. And when he stood up, the next words out of his mouth stopped every fork in the building. Welcome back to Wise Family Revenge. This is the channel where the quiet women finally get the last word, where the people everyone spent years underestimating turn out to be the ones who were holding the whole thing together. If a story has ever made you sit up a little straighter and think, "That was me, that was my family," then you are exactly where you belong tonight. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The night before that wedding, I worked a 12-hour shift in the emergency room, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, a man came in gray and sweating, and sure, he had indigestion. He did not have indigestion. I saw it in the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was looking, in the numbers that were still technically fine but drifting the wrong direction. I got him on the monitor before he could argue. 9 minutes later, his heart tried to quit, and because he was already wired and lined and watched, it did not get the chance. His wife found me by the vending machines afterward and held onto my hands and cried, and I told her the same thing I always tell them. He did the hard part, he came in. That is the work I do. It does not photograph well. There is no ceremony for the woman who noticed the drift before the alarm, no plaque for the hands that stayed steady while everyone else's shook. I drove home to my apartment as the sky went the color of a bruise healing, 40 minutes from the suburb where I grew up, and I peeled off scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline. On my phone was a heavy cream envelope I'd propped against the coffee maker a week ago. Brooke's wedding. And underneath it, a text from my mother that had come in during my shift. "Please try not to wear anything shapeless this time. We'll have people there who matter." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down and looked at that envelope for a long time. I almost didn't go. I have spent my whole life learning to trust the drift before the alarm, and I should have trusted that instinct too. People ask me sometimes why I never talk about work, and I never have a good answer ready, so I say it's confidential and let them assume the rest. The truth is simpler and stranger than that. Some things you do so quietly that no one ever learns your name, and for a long time I believed that was the whole point. You are not supposed to be the story. You are supposed to be the reason there still is one. I learned that at the hospital, but if I'm honest, I learned it long before, in a house where being needed and being seen were two entirely different currencies, and I only ever earned the first one. So I got good at being needed and invisible at the same time. I got good at making myself small enough to fit in the gaps my family left for me. It's a useful skill in a trauma bay. It is a slow poison at a dinner table. I hadn't been to a single family event in almost 2 years, and I told myself it was the schedule, the rotating shifts, the way holidays fall on the days the ER needs you most. That's a clean story. It let me sleep. It let me believe the distance between me and them was something I'd chosen, a professional sacrifice. Noble even. Later I would learn it was never my schedule keeping me away from that family. It was a story someone had been telling about me for years, in living rooms I was never invited into, and I was the only one in the whole family who had never heard it. I was 14 when my mother married Gerald Whitmore, and I remember the exact afternoon our lives split into before and after. Before was a 2-bedroom apartment over a dry cleaner, my mother in a diner apron that smelled like burnt coffee, the two of us splitting a grilled cheese when money got thin at the end of the month. After was a house with a pool and a circular driveway, and a man named Gerald who spoke softly and owned 3 commercial buildings downtown. My mother changed her name to Meredith Whitmore, and then she changed everything else. New voice, slower and rounder at the edges. New friends who golfed. New way of saying my name, like it had a splinter in it. Gerald came with a daughter, Brooke, a year younger than me, and from the first week it was clear which of us the new life had room for. Brooke got the big bedroom and the riding lessons and the way my mother's face opened up like a window when she walked in. I got the room over the garage and a look my mother gave me in front of company, a quick flick of the eyes that meant sit up, don't embarrass me, remember where we came from and never, ever mention it. Once, cleaning, I found a shoebox on the top shelf of her closet. Inside were her old work shoes from the diner, the heels worn down to nothing, the leather cracked and soft. She never threw them out. She just hid them, the way you'd hide a body. My mother didn't marry up. She erased down. And I was the one part of her old life she could never quite delete. Brooke's wedding was going to be the coronation my mother had been rehearsing for 20 years. Not Brooke's coronation. Hers. 120 guests at a vineyard estate an hour outside the city, the kind of place with valet parking and a name in gold cursive on the gate. The country club crowd. Gerald's business partners. The women my mother had spent 2 decades trying to be indistinguishable from. This was the day she got to stand in the middle of all of it and be the mother of the bride at the most beautiful wedding anyone had seen that season, and have every one of those people finally, permanently, forget the diner apron. I understood all of that, and I still wanted to go. That is the part that's hard to explain to people who had normal families. There is a specific hunger that gets planted in you when you grow up on the outside of your own household, watching the warm light through a window you're not allowed to stand in. It doesn't die when you become an adult. It doesn't die when you buy your own house and save your own lives and build a whole self they know nothing about. It just waits. And every wedding, every holiday, every gathering, it whispers the same stupid, hopeful thing. Maybe this is the time they finally see you. So I told myself the plan out loud in my kitchen, like a prayer or a set of vitals. One dinner. Smile, survive, leave early for a morning shift. Keep your dignity in your pocket where they can't reach it. I had no idea my mother had already decided exactly where I would sit, and it was not at a table. I am not a woman who walks into ambushes unarmed anymore. I learned that the slow way. So I planned that day the way I plan a shift, with exits and contingencies. I drove my own car so I could leave the second I needed to, no relying on anyone for a ride home. I picked up an actual morning shift for the next day, a real one, so that I have to work early would be true and not a coward's excuse. I chose a dress in deep green, simple, nothing my mother could call shapeless, and nothing that begged for attention either. Armor that looks like manners. The only person in that family I still called just to hear a kind voice was my Aunt Maureen, my mother's younger sister, who had somehow grown up in the same poverty and come out soft instead of frightened. I called her from the car in the vineyard parking lot. She was already there. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you actually came," she said, and something in the way she said actually snagged in my chest. Then, lower, quick, like she'd been waiting years to say it. "Ashley, do you know what your mother's been telling people about you? Because I have to tell you, it's not—" And then her voice went bright and false, in that way people do when the wrong person walks up, and I heard my mother's country club laugh come through the phone, close, and Maureen said, "There she is. Gotta go. We'll talk inside." And hung up. I sat in the car with the engine ticking as it cooled and my hands very still on the wheel, telling people what exactly. I got out and walked toward the gold cursive gate, and I did not yet know I was walking into the answer. Inside the gate, it was all string lights and white peonies and waiters carrying trays of champagne like it was air. It was genuinely beautiful, and I let myself feel that for exactly as long as it took my mother to find me. She was radiant in oyster gray, working the arriving guests like a senator, and when she reached me, her smile stayed switched on while her eyes did the flick, up and down, taking inventory. "You couldn't have done something with your hair," she said, not a question. Then a couple drifted over. Older money, the woman's diamonds throwing little sparks, and my mother's whole body rearranged itself toward them. "This is Ashley," she said. "She helps out at a hospital." Helps out. like I mopped the place. The couple smiled the smile you give the help and moved on, and my mother moved with them, and I stood there holding a champagne flute I hadn't wanted. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't even close. Over the next half hour, 3 separate relatives found their way to me with the same strange expression, somewhere between surprise and suspicion, and said some version of the same thing. "Oh, you came. We didn't think you would. Your mom said you always cancel." A cousin I'd been close to as a kid actually said, "We figured you'd written us all off. Honestly, after everything." After what? I wanted to ask. But you don't interrogate people at a wedding. So I just smiled and drifted and did the math in my head, the way I count a pulse. I had not missed a single family event I had ever actually been invited to. Not one. And yet the entire room seemed to believe I'd spent years slamming a door in their faces. Brooke found me near the seating chart, luminous in white, already a little drunk on being the center of every eye in the building. She hugged me the way you hug a coat you forgot you owned. "You made it," she said. "Mom wasn't sure you'd fit it into your schedule." There it was again. That word. Schedule. Doing quiet work. Then she softened for half a second. Because Brooke was never cruel the way our mother was cruel. Just raised in the warm spot and never once made to feel the cold. "This is Jason," she said, and pulled forward a tall, easy-smiling man who shook my hand with both of his and said he'd heard so much about me, which we both knew was a polite lie, because there was nothing about me to have heard. He seemed kind, genuinely kind, in a way that made me hope Brooke had gotten luckier than she understood. Behind him, across the room near the head table, an older man was watching me. Gray at the temples, a slight favoring of one leg when he shifted his weight, a good suit worn like a man who was more comfortable in work boots. When my eyes met his, something crossed his face. Recognition, or the ghost of it, a name he was reaching for and couldn't quite grab, and then a photographer swept in and pulled him away for pictures, one hand on his shoulder, and the moment closed. I felt someone still watching me a beat too long. When I turned back, he'd looked away. I thought nothing of it. I meet 1,000 faces a year and none of them remember me. That's practically the job description. I was wrong to look away. I would understand that later in front of everyone. When the staff began herding people toward the reception hall for dinner, a young woman with a headset and a clipboard intercepted me before I reached the doors. She looked harried and hopeful, the way event coordinators look when they're one missing person away from disaster. "Are you the family coordinator?" she asked. Mrs. Whitmore said someone from the family would be helping with guest sign-in and seating. I blinked at her. No, I'm her daughter. I'm a guest." The young woman's face did something complicated, and she glanced down at a printed list in her hand, and then back up at me, with the particular apology of someone caught in the middle of another family's cruelty without knowing it. "Oh," she said. "It's just, your name's on my sheet as the coordinator." She turned the clipboard so I could see. And there it was, in the same elegant font as the place cards, next to a little checkbox. "Ashley, guest coordinator. Sign in." Not a table, not a seat. A job. My mother hadn't forgotten to seat me. She had seated me on my feet, by the door, with a pen, so that for one more evening I could be useful and invisible at the same time, and so that not one of her important people would ever have to wonder why the successful family had a daughter who was only just a nurse. That was the first moment that night I understood something cold and clear. My mother hadn't given me a place at her wedding, she'd given me a shift. I could have refused. I want you to know I thought about it. Standing there with that clipboard being offered to me like a favor. But refusing meant a scene, and a scene meant proving every whispered story about me right. The difficult one, the one who ruins nice things. So I took the pen. That is the trap they build for people like me. Every exit is designed to look like proof of the lie. My mother materialized at my elbow while I was checking in the third couple, close enough that only I could hear her lipstick smile aimed at the room. "Just help out, sweetheart," she murmured. "You're so good with people. It's not as though you brought a date to seat." And she was gone again in a swirl of oyster gray before I could answer, off to be embraced by a woman in emeralds. So I stood by the door of my sister's wedding and checked names off a list while guests handed me their coats and asked me where the restrooms were, because a woman standing by a door with a clipboard is staff, and staff have no story, no life, no 9-minute save at 3 in the morning. One older gentleman, sweet and oblivious, pressed a folded $20 bill into my hand as he passed and said, "You all are doing a wonderful job tonight." I have caught a stranger's blood in my hands. I have felt a heart restart under my palms. I have been thanked by weeping wives at vending machines. And at my own sister's wedding, the only tip I got for my trouble was $20 for being mistaken for the help. I put it in the donation jar for the newlyweds. It seemed like the cleanest place for it. If you have ever been the one handed the clipboard while everyone else got a chair, the one asked to help out so that no one important has to notice you're there, then you already know the exact taste that was in my mouth right then. Metal and old shame. Stay with me, because what happened at that dinner table an hour later is the reason I'm telling you any of this, and it changed the shape of my whole life. If you've ever been her, type "I see you" in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. Because here's the thing they never understood about me. Standing by a door with a clipboard is not so different from standing at the foot of a bed in the trauma bay. You watch. You read the room the way I read a monitor. And from my post by the door, invisible, I could see all of it with a clarity the guests of honor never had. I could see which laughter was real and which was performed for the table. I could see my mother touching arms and dropping names and glowing in the exact center of the attention she'd starved for since the diner. I could see Gerald hovering at the edges of his own family's wedding like a guest in his own house, refilling his own glass. And I could see, across the room, that older man with the gray temples watching me again from the head table, no longer casual about it, leaning slightly toward the woman beside him and saying something, his eyes never leaving me. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know he'd been carrying mine for 4 years. I only knew that of everyone in that gilded room, he was the single person looking at me like I was a person. Aunt Maureen caught me during the lull before dinner, when the coordinator finally released me from the door and I went looking for water and a wall to stand against. She took my arm and steered me into an alcove by the coat check, and up close I could see she'd been working up to this all night. "I have to tell you something, and I should have told you years ago," she said, "and I'm ashamed I didn't." Then it came out of her in a rush, the way a thing comes out when it's been pressing on someone a long time. My mother had spent years telling the family a version of me I had never met, that I thought I was better than all of them now, that I'd chosen my career over my own blood, that I found them embarrassing, that I never came around because I looked down on where I came from. And the invitations. Maureen's voice cracked on the invitations. All those Thanksgivings and christenings and birthdays I supposedly blew off. Half of them I was never told about. My mother would tell everyone she'd invited me and I'd declined, again, too busy, too important. And who was going to check? Who calls the estranged, difficult daughter to confirm she was actually snubbed? "We believed her," Maureen whispered, her eyes wet. "God forgive me, Ashley. We all just believed her, because why would a mother lie about her own child?" I stood very still against that wall, while the string quartet tuned up somewhere behind me. All those years I'd thought I was the one choosing distance, protecting myself, being noble about my sacrifice. Someone had been building a wall around me brick by brick and then telling the whole family that I was the one who'd walked away from it. When they finally opened the reception hall, I went in with everyone else, because some stubborn, hopeful animal in me still needed to see it with my own eyes. The room was staggering. 200 candles, a ceiling dripping with wisteria, and in the very center, elevated, the head table, set for the family. I found the seats as the guests flowed around me. A place card in that same gold cursive for Meredith, one for Gerald, Brooke and Jason in the center under a floral arch. Even one for a friend of my mother's, some woman named Carol from the club, seated at the family table at my sister's wedding. I walked the whole length of it twice. There was no card with my name on it. Not at the head table, not at the good tables near it. I finally found myself the way you find a splinter, by the ache. Table 14, back by the service entrance, next to the swinging doors where the waiters came and went with a bang and a rush of kitchen heat. And there, at my single place setting, was my card. It did not say Ashley Cole. In that beautiful gold cursive, my mother had ordered a card printed that read, Ashley, guest coordinator. She had spent money, real money, to have a card made that erased my name and replaced it with a task. I picked it up and held it between two fingers. Around me, the room filled with laughter and the scrape of 200 chairs, and I stood at a table by the kitchen holding a card that told me, in gold, exactly what I was worth to the woman who made me. I didn't know it yet, standing there. But before that dinner was over, another card was going to be pulled from another pocket, at the head table, in front of everyone, and it was going to have my name on it after all. I needed a minute before I could sit down at table 14 and pretend, so I slipped out to find the powder room and a moment where no one was performing anything at me. I went the wrong way and ended up in the bridal suite, a little side room with a lit mirror and Brooke's going away things laid out, and my mother's handbag open on the vanity where she'd left it. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. But my eye caught on something wrong inside that expensive bag, something that didn't belong with the lipstick and the club account cards. Tucked into the bottom, wrapped in a silk scarf like a relic, were a pair of shoes. Old shoes. The diner shoes, heels worn to nothing, leather cracked soft with 20 years of double shifts. She'd brought them. To the vineyard, to the coronation, to the day she finally became untouchable, my mother had secretly carried the one thing that proved she'd ever been touchable at all. And I understood her then, more than I ever wanted to. She was so terrified of being found out as the diner waitress in the good dress that she'd built her whole life, and mine, into a wall against it. And she kept the shoes, because a person cannot fully outrun the thing they're most ashamed of. They can only hide it in silk at the bottom of a bag. She walked in as I was looking. Her face went white, then rigid, and she snatched the bag off the vanity and clutched it to her chest like I'd caught her with a body. "Don't you ever," she said, low and shaking. "Look at me like you know me." For 1 second I almost felt sorry for her. Then she reminded me exactly why I couldn't. Dinner service began, and my mother, rattled from the bridal suite, did what frightened people do. She got crueler, and she got louder, and she aimed it at the safest target in the room. Me. She worked the head table and the tables near it, and every few minutes her voice would rise just enough to carry, dressed up as fond family teasing. "Oh, Ashley never married. Far too busy with her little hospital job," she said to Carol from the club, and Carol laughed politely. "We're honestly not even sure what she does over there," she told a business partner of Gerald's. "Something with bandages." A ripple of amused, well-bred laughter each time. From table 14, I watched her turn my life into a punchline for people who valued a woman by her handbag. And I watched Gerald. He sat at the head table in a suit that cost more than my monthly mortgage. And every time my mother sharpened another sentence against me, his eyes went down to his plate, or to his glass, which he turned and turned by the stem. Once, only once, he looked up, and our eyes met across that beautiful, terrible room, and I let him see it, the whole plain ask of it. "Say something. You raised me from 14. You are the only father I ever had. Say one thing." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he looked down and rearranged his napkin, smoothing it across his lap with great care, as though the wrinkles in the linen were the problem that needed solving. I stopped waiting for him after that. You can only stand in a doorway hoping to be let in for so long before you notice the person on the other side has been holding the handle shut the whole time. By the time the plates were cleared for the toasts, I had already found the edge of myself and started planning the walk to my car. Morning shift, I would say. It's real. I'll slip out during the dancing. My hand was practically on my keys in my clutch. And that was when I really looked at the man with the gray temples, because he'd stopped even pretending to look anywhere else. He was seated at the head table, of course, which meant he was family now, which meant, I did the math slowly, he was the groom's father. He shifted in his seat, and I saw again the way he favored his right leg, the careful economy of a body that had been badly broken once and put back together. There was a faint scar at his hairline, a pale seam I would have missed if I didn't spend my nights reading exactly those kinds of maps on strangers' skin. He kept looking at me the way you look at a word on the tip of your tongue, turning me over, certain and uncertain at once. Something in me stirred too, a deep down flicker, the ghost of a face seen once under terrible fluorescent light. But I dismissed it, the way I always dismissed it. I have stood over 1,000 of the worst nights of strangers' lives. They do not remember me. They remember the pain and the ceiling tiles, and if they're lucky, the fact that they lived, but not the woman at the head of the bed. That is how it's supposed to work. He kept staring like he was reaching for a name he'd misplaced years ago. I would find out, in front of 120 people, that he had never misplaced it at all. The toasts began, and the room dimmed to a warm gold, and my mother came into her full glory at last. When it was her turn, she rose with a microphone and a champagne flute, and stood in the pool of light like a woman who had waited her whole life for exactly this wattage of attention. She was, I'll admit, magnificent at it. She thanked the vineyard and the planner. She welcomed the Delaney family, gesturing graciously toward the Groom's people, toward the gray-templed man, who nodded but didn't smile. She introduced her family to the room, one shining bead at a time. My wonderful husband Gerald, my beautiful daughter Brooke, our new son Jason. She named Carol from the club. She named people I'd never met. And she came to the end of her family, the whole assembled portrait of the life she'd built, and there was a small pause, and I felt it coming the way you feel a code coming before the monitor even alarms. A pressure change in the room, a held breath. Because I knew my mother. I knew she would not simply leave me out. Leaving me out was passive, and she had a room full of important people and a live microphone, and one more chance to make the diner apron disappear forever by turning her invisible daughter into a laugh. Her eyes found me at table 14 by the kitchen doors. Her smile widened, and she lifted the microphone for one more introduction, the one she'd clearly been saving, the one she thought would land like a charming little joke about her charmingly modest other child. I set my clutch down on the table. Some part of me already knew that whatever she said next, I was not going to sit quietly through it the way I had every year of my life before this one. "And," my mother said, letting the words stretch, her voice warm with the confidence of a woman who has never once been contradicted in a room like this. "I suppose I should introduce my other daughter." A few heads turned, searching, because most of them had assumed the woman by the kitchen doors was staff. She gestured toward me with the champagne flute, a graceful little flourish, and delivered the line she'd been polishing all night. "This is Ashley, just a nurse." And she laughed. It was a light, tinkling, practiced laugh, an invitation, and the room accepted it. Brooke laughed first and loudest, a bright peal from under the floral arch. My sister in her white dress laughing at me with our mother. And then the tables laughed. That awful obedient ripple of 120 people who don't know the story and don't need to, who only know that the woman in the good dress has decided this is funny, and it is safer and warmer to laugh along than to wonder why. I stood at table 14 by the swinging kitchen doors with 200 candles reflecting in 200 wine glasses, and I heard myself described, to the largest audience of my entire life, as a punchline. Just a nurse. I want to tell you I had a speech ready. I didn't. What I had instead was a strange and sudden quiet, the same quiet that comes over me in the half-second before a patient crashes, when the noise falls away and everything gets very clear and very slow. I looked at my laughing sister. I looked at my mother lit up like a saint. I looked at Gerald studying his napkin, and for the first time in 33 years, standing in the wreckage of my own dignity, I felt the hunger die. I stopped, right there, forever, trying to earn a seat at that table. I did not shout. I want you to understand that, because for years I had imagined that if this moment ever came, I would finally let it all out. And instead, what happened was the opposite of noise. I reached down and picked up my clutch. I set the gold place card, the one that said, guest coordinator, gently face down on table 14. And I stepped out from behind the table and started walking toward the doors at the back of the hall, unhurried, spine straight, the way you walk out of a room when you have finally decided you are never walking back into it. The laughter was still trailing off. A few people had noticed the tall woman in green moving through the tables and had gone quiet, sensing something they couldn't name. As I passed the head table, I stopped for just a moment beside Brooke, my little sister in her wedding white, and I meant what I said with my whole battered heart. Congratulations, Brooke, truly. I hope he's as kind as he seems. Her smile faltered, confused, some dim understanding beginning to surface through the champagne. My mother, sensing her joke slipping away from her, opened her mouth to salvage it, some fond little dig cocked and ready to keep the room on her side. I had made it 3 steps past the head table toward the doors, 3 steps toward the rest of my life, when I heard a chair scrape hard against the floor behind me. A real scrape, wood on wood, a man standing up too fast. And then a voice, rough and certain and loud enough to stop the whole room, said the last words I ever expected to hear at my sister's wedding. It said my own words back to me. Wait, you're the girl who... I turned. The groom's father was on his feet at the head table, one hand braced on the white cloth, staring at me like a man seeing a ghost he'd made peace with. Wait, he said again, and his voice caught. You're the girl who... The nurse. The word landed in the silent room like a stone in a pond. County General. It was you. 4 years ago. The pileup on Route 9. My hand tightened on my clutch. 120 faces swung between him and me, and somewhere a fork was set down on china with a small clear ring, and then nothing, no sound at all. I knew, the second he said Route 9, exactly who he was. I had never known his name. In the trauma bay, you rarely learn their names in time. You learn their injuries, their blood pressure, the color of their lips. But I knew that face now, 4 years older and healed over, and I knew the scar at his hairline because I had watched them close it. And every instinct I have, everything the hospital drilled into me about privacy and dignity and the sacredness of what happens behind that curtain, made me do the only thing I could. I protected him. Sir, I said gently, the way you talk someone down. I think you may have me confused with... No. He shook his head, and his eyes were shining now, wet and fierce, and he would not let me give him the exit I was offering. No, I never forget a face. Not that face. You held my hand. His voice broke clean in half in front of everyone. You held my hand, and you told me I was not going to die on that table. And the whole gilded room, my mother's coronation, 120 of the most important people she had ever gathered in one place, went absolutely, perfectly still. He turned to the room then, because he needed them to understand, and Frank Delaney told them his own story in his own words. And there was nothing I could do to stop him, and nothing I should have. 4 years ago I was in a wreck on Route 9, he said. The big pileup, the one that closed the interstate for a day. They cut me out of my truck. By the time I got to the hospital, I was bleeding on the inside and I didn't know it, and neither did anybody else, because my numbers looked fine and the place was full of people who looked worse. He had to stop and steady himself on the table. This woman looked at me. Everybody else was looking at their charts and their monitors, and she looked at me, and she said, "Something's wrong with this one," and nobody believed her, and she made them believe her. She started calling for the surgeon before the numbers turned. She got the blood going. And when they wheeled me back, she stayed up at my head the whole time, and she held my hand, and she said, "You are not dying tonight, Frank. You are going to live to see your son get married." His voice cracked on the word married. He pointed at Jason, his son, sitting stunned in his groom's chair. "She's the reason I'm sitting at this table. She's the reason there's a groom at this wedding at all." Then Frank Delaney looked straight at my mother, who stood frozen at the microphone with her practiced smile finally, fatally slipping, and he said the thing that pulled the whole night inside out. "Just a nurse?" He said it quietly, almost bewildered, like the words physically did not make sense to him. "Ma'am, This, just a nurse, is the only reason my boy has a father in the room today. The room broke open. I watched it happen the way I'd watched everything else that night, from a small, still distance, as 120 people turned to look at me with entirely new eyes. The whispers started first, a rush of them, and then somewhere in the back a chair scraped, and a man stood, and then another, and then the applause came, uncertain at first and then rolling, filling that enormous candlelit room, a sound I had absolutely no idea what to do with. Aunt Maureen was crying openly, both hands pressed to her mouth. Jason had risen halfway from his seat and was staring at me like I'd handed him his father twice. And Brooke, my sister Brooke, turned from me to our mother and back again, and I watched something break behind her eyes, watched the simple childhood arithmetic she'd been raised on stop adding up, watched her see, maybe for the first time in her whole protected life, exactly what our mother was. Gerald had gone gray as ash. And my mother. My mother stood in her pool of light with the microphone still in her hand and tried, desperately, to climb back on top of the moment the only way she knew how. "Well, of course," she said, and her voice came out too high. "Of course we are all just so proud of Ashley. She's always been our little... She's always been so..." But the words had nowhere to land. The room had already done the math she'd spent 20 years preventing. She had stood in front of everyone who mattered to her and called the woman who saves lives just a nurse, seconds before that same room learned exactly whose life she'd saved. My mother was reaching for me now. The same woman who'd handed me a clipboard was reaching across the head table for my hand. And here is where you probably expect the good part. The part where I take that microphone. Where I stand in the light I've been denied my whole life and tell all 120 of them everything. The clipboard, the $20 tip, the place card by the kitchen, the years of lies, the shoes hidden in silk at the bottom of her bag. Where I burn her down to the studs in front of the exact people she built the whole lie to impress. I felt the power of it, sitting right there in my open hand. I could have. God help me. Part of me wanted to. And I saw, just as clearly, the other door. The one my mother was holding open as she reached for me, saying my name now, warm and public and desperate. "Come sit, sweetheart. Come up to the family table. Come let me show all these people the daughter I'm so proud of. The reconciliation, the photograph, the teary embrace that would give the whole room its tidy ending and give my mother back the image the truth had just taken. All I had to do was take her hand and sit down and let her fold me back into the family portrait, and everyone would applaud and it would look like grace. And I stood there between those two open doors with the whole room waiting, and I understood something that undid 33 years in a single breath. Both doors led back to the same table. Both of them let this room, these people, my mother's audience, keep deciding what I was worth. And I finally did not want either one. My mother's fingers were almost at my sleeve. Frank Delaney, God bless him, had already pulled out the empty chair beside his own at the head table and turned it toward me, an invitation from the other direction, a seat among people who knew what I was. Two chairs offered at once, from two different worlds, and the whole room leaning in, wanting me to take one, wanting the scene to resolve the way scenes are supposed to. And I did not take either one. I reached out and I gently, deliberately, moved my mother's reaching hand aside. Not a slap, not a shove, just a quiet redirection, the way you move a hand that is going somewhere it shouldn't. I did not accuse her. I did not say one word about the clipboard or the place card or the shoes. I did not reach for the microphone, and I did not tell the room a single thing about what I had done in that trauma bay, because that story was never mine to sell for a room's approval. It belonged behind the curtain where I'd earned it. And it had already been told tonight by the one person who had the right to tell it. Instead, I turned to Frank, this rough, kind stranger who had just handed me back to myself in front of everyone, and I took his hand the way I'd taken it 4 years ago, and I said, softly, only to him, "I remember Route 9, Frank. I've thought about you. I'm so glad you made it home." His face crumpled, and he held my hand in both of his and nodded, unable to speak. I did not confirm a chart. I did not claim a save. I just let one human being know he'd been remembered too. And then I straightened up, in my simple green dress, at table 14 by the swinging kitchen doors, in front of the 120 most important people my mother had ever assembled, and I turned to face her. And the room went so quiet you could hear the candles. "Mom," I said. Just that, first, and my voice did not shake, because I was not angry anymore, and that surprised me more than anything else that night. She stared at me, the microphone forgotten in her hand, her whole beautiful assembled face coming apart at the seams, because she could feel it too, that whatever was about to happen, she had lost control of the story for the first time in 20 years. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room was holding its breath for me. "A seat at your table," I said, "was never proof of my worth." I let that sit for a moment in all that candlelight. My worth is what my hands did when none of you were watching. Nobody laughed this time. I picked up the little gold place card from where it lay face down on table 14, the one that had erased my name, and I set it upright in front of my mother on the white cloth, gently, so she could read what she had ordered printed. Guest coordinator. That was all. I made no speech about it. I let the card do the only talking it needed to do. Then I turned to my sister, still frozen under her flowers, and I meant it as much the second time as the first. "Congratulations, Brooke. I really do hope you're happy." And I walked. Past the head table, past my ashen stepfather, past Carol from the club and the couple with the diamonds and my weeping aunt, down the length of that impossible room and out the doors into the cool dark, on my own 2 feet, spine straight, nobody's clipboard in my hands. I had spent 33 years walking toward that table, trying every year to earn my way into the warm light of it. It turned out that the light I'd been starving for was on the other side of the door the whole time. It turned out freedom was just walking away from the table for good. I was almost to my car in the dark of the vineyard lot, the string lights of the reception glowing behind me like a party on the far shore of a lake I'd finally swum away from, when I heard footsteps hurrying on the gravel. Gerald. Out of breath, his good suit rumpled, the man who had raised me from 14 and never once stood between me and my mother's cruelty. He stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment he couldn't get anything out. Then he said the truest thing he'd ever said to me. I should have said something. Years ago. Every single time. He didn't try to explain it. He didn't reach for an excuse or ask me to come back inside. He just stood there in the gravel and let it be the plain, ugly fact that it was, that he had watched a child he was supposed to protect get made small for 2 decades, and he had chosen the quiet of his own house over her, every time, because it was easier. "You could have," I said. "There was no heat in it. That's the part you'll have to live with. I've had to live with it too." He flinched and nodded, like a man finally setting down something he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped feeling the weight of it. I opened my car door. "If you want to know me," I told him, "you know where I work and you know my number. But you come to me yourself. Not through her. Never again through her." He nodded again, slower, and I saw in the wash of the parking lights that he was crying. This soft, weak man, 40 years too late. I got in my car. I did not slam the door. I drove home through the dark, the vineyard shrinking to nothing in my mirror, the highway unspooling empty ahead of me. My phone started going off before I'd even reached the interstate, and it did not stop. Relatives. Numbers I didn't have saved. A voicemail from Maureen, half of it just her crying. A text from Brooke that I didn't read until much later. I let it all buzz in my clutch on the passenger seat, and I drove with both hands on the wheel and the windows cracked to the summer night. And I waited to fall apart. Because that's what you're supposed to do after a night like that. It didn't come. What came instead was something I hadn't felt in that family's presence in my entire life. Quiet. Not the small, swallowed quiet of making myself invisible at a dinner table. The other kind. The clean, enormous quiet that comes over me at the end of a brutal shift when the patient is stable, and the sun is coming up, and I peel off my gloves and realize, against all odds, we kept someone alive tonight. I had walked into that vineyard a woman still hoping to be chosen by people who were never going to choose her. I drove out of it as someone who had finally, at 33, stopped asking. For once in my life, the person I saved that night was me. I'd love to tell you my mother woke up changed. She didn't. Within a week, she had a new version of the story polished and in circulation. That Ashley had always been dramatic, that she'd made a scene at her own sister's wedding, that the whole thing with the Delaney man had been terribly overblown and a little embarrassing, really. The women at the club nodded and sipped their wine. Some of them, the ones who needed the version where Meredith was never cruel. The status she'd bled for did not vanish. That isn't how it works, and I won't pretend it is. But the wall she'd spent years building around me had a hole punched clean through the middle of it now, and things started coming through. Maureen called me the next morning and cried again and asked if she could just come sit with me sometime. No occasion. Two cousins reached out, sheepish, saying they were sorry. They hadn't known. They'd believed what they were told. And Brooke's text, when I finally read it, was short, and it was real. I didn't know, Ashley, about any of it. I'm sorry, I laughed. It wasn't a reconciliation, and I didn't pretend it was one, but it was a true thing said out loud, which was more than that family had ever given me. Frank Delaney called too, that same week, having gotten my number from his son. He and his wife wanted to have me to dinner, a real one, at a table, in a chair with my name on it. His whole family did. Somewhere in the wreckage of my mother's coronation, without anyone planning it, I had walked out of one family and been quietly folded into another. 3 days after the wedding, I went back to work. A little after dawn, a woman came into my ER frightened and alone, and certain it was nothing. And it was not nothing. And I saw the drift before the alarm the way I always do, and I stayed with her through the worst hour of her life, and no one will ever throw a party about it. There is no gold cursive card with my name on it in that trauma bay. There is no room full of important people applauding when the numbers come back. There is just the work, and a stranger who gets to go home, and a name they'll probably never remember. Some things you do so quietly that no one ever learns your name. For 33 years I had believed, deep down, that this was the tragedy of my life, that I was the invisible one, the one who mattered only as long as I was useful, and never a second past it. Standing at that bedside in the dawn light, my hands steady, I finally understood the truth. It was never the tragedy, it was the honor, and no one had to hand it to me. So if you take one thing from my story, let it be this. A person's worth was never the seat they were handed at the table, or the way they were introduced, or the laughter of a room that doesn't know them. It is what their hands do when no one at all is watching, and that is the one thing on this earth that no one can give you and no one can ever take away. That's my story. One clipboard, one cruel little laugh, and one man who never forgot a face. If you have ever been called just anything, just a nurse, just a mom, just the quiet one who helps out, take this as your sign tonight that your worth was never the seat, it was always the work. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.